Isn't that beautiful? It's not an oxymoron. It's not like military intelligence or airplane food. It actually has a meaning. It's one that started about 5 years ago when I was in a bar somewhere, I think it was Seattle. I'll get to him in a minute. What lethal generosity means is that if you treat your customers with great kindness, if you give them the kind of experience that Brian Solis was talking about earlier today, you're going to absolutely screw the competition. There is no way traditional marketing can stop a customer, take a customer away because of a price or a weekend sale or a deal. I started to learn this 5 years ago with this guy. Does anybody recognize him? He's sort of strange, and he's in some far-off land, I'm not quite sure. But Robert and I were sitting in a bar, I think it was Seattle, and he told me a story about his first job. He was in a camera store in San Jose, California. And every now and then he'd pull a little trick. Somebody would come in and ask for a camera, a Minolta in that era, I would guess. And Robert would say, yeah, I've got that camera, but you know, the guys around the corner, they've got a sale on it right now for 20% off. Somebody would step back and look at him with disbelief and then go around the corner, buy the camera, sooner or later come back in, say, boy, that was really nice of you. That was a great deal. I need a camera case, and I need a tripod, and it's an old, those of you who are old like me in the room will remember this stuff. It's called film. And they would keep coming back, and they would have something to talk about, this guy who sent them away. And I listened to Robert Stern. I said, why did you do this? What did you think? He says, I learned a lesson. You can lose a sale and gain a customer, and the customer's a lot more valuable. I said, that was cool, but at the time we were in the glory of the fame and almost fortune of Naked Conversation, our first book together. A little while later, I finished a book on my own called Twitterville, and I was told about this company in Canada. I know this stuff is as bad as Foster's, for God's sakes, but it's a story about them. Molson is now Molson Coors, and it's the largest brewery in Canada, and they long have had a marketing campaign about responsible drinking, which is a pretty good idea if you're a traditional beer maker. In 2009, when I was writing Twitterville, the city of Toronto, like many cities of the world, had to have some budget cutbacks, and they cut $80,000 out of the budget, eliminating free public transportation on New Year's Eve, the biggest drinking night of the year in most of the world. And Molson immediately stepped up and said, private industry's got to step in here. This is for the public good. So we need $80,000. We call upon the business community of Toronto to ante up. We're putting up the first $20,000, and to show our civic mindedness, we call upon Labatt's, their most bitter rival, to match our $20,000. This is very noble, but they did it on something that was brand new, something that when Robert was in Camera Store wasn't around yet. It was called Twitter. And the people at Molson were using Twitter, and the people at Labatt's was not. And so it started going around. People in Toronto were just getting into Twitter, particularly young adults, young social adults, the prime customers, the customers you can have for 50 years. And so they started talking about how cool this was, the Molson Challenge. And Molson never said that. The users started saying that, and it started going around. And about 5 or 6 days later, there were over 20,000 tweets, which probably you got more than that today, but back then that was a lot of tweets. The local newspaper picked it up, and they ran a front page story about the Molson Challenge. And of course, they called up Labatt's and said, how are you going to respond to the Molson Challenge? And Labatt said, what's the Molson's Challenge? So this was the first example of technology playing a role in a brand using conversations to get to customers while the competition stood there clueless, putting their money into advertising and other traditional activities. I wrote about this in Twitterville. I called it lethal generosity. A lot of people loved the expression, and it was suggested I write a book about it. I researched it at the time, and I couldn't find enough stories. There just wasn't enough technology out. There wasn't just enough adoption out. And there certainly weren't too many brands in the world who were paying attention to this stuff yet. The blue bottle in the corner there is Labatt's. They were caught in this little quandary. They could follow the challenge of their leader and establish Molson as a thought leader, their competitor, and establish Molson as a thought leader, or they could say no and support irresponsible drinking on New Year's Eve. It was quite a lethal choice. They ponied up the $20,000 and adhered to the competitor's challenge. This story I got in 2013. It's guy in the middle is an old hippie named Hap Klopp. He went to UC Berkeley, and he got into the out-of-doors movement. He and a few other hippies started a company that got based in Berkeley called the North Face. The North Face in itself is sort of a brand challenge. It was named after the Eiger Pass in the Alps, which still holds the Guinness Book of World Records for mountain climbers dying while trying to climb it. He didn't have any money for advertising and marketing. As a matter of fact, he said, hell, we couldn't even afford rent most months. But he came up with an idea. He called it the lifetime guarantee. And this guarantee was, if anything goes wrong ever, we'll make good on it. Now, that was pretty ballsy. Around the corner was Sierra Designs. They listened to this young starter, and they said, we do that too. So a Sierra Design customer comes in one day, and he goes up to Hap Klopp, who was also the chief salesperson on the floor and also the cashier and a whole lot of other things at that time. And he said, you know, I've got this thing from Sierra Design. It's a backpack, and the zipper's broken. And they said they'll make good on it, but they got to send it to the manufacturer. And somebody pulled a Scoble. The clerk said, why don't you go over and ask the North Face what they can do? And Hap said, sure, come on in, have a seat. He went over to the other side of the building, which is where they were making the stuff. He handed it to a stitcher. The stitcher stitched it up. He handed it back to the customer, and the customer said, fabulous, I can go on this big trip this weekend that I wanted to go, and I wasn't going to be able to go, and thank you. How much do I owe you? And Hap said, just enjoy your trip. Have a nice time. That guy has been a customer of the North Face for 50 years. He has brought in an incalculable number of people. Hap has told the story in books. The book appeared in a column I wrote for Forbes. The story appeared in a column I wrote for Forbes. It was a way of branding the company as the company that is centered on the customer and what the customer needs. We'll guarantee what we do no matter what has gone wrong with it. If you have a problem and you're in our community, we will help you because we're in the same community. The result is Sierra Design was flipped over. That's why you see an inverted logo there. It landed on its head because there is nothing sweeter than being kind to a person and stealing them from your competitors. In the book I wrote with Robert in 2013, we talked about the convergence of 5 technologies: social, location technologies, sensors, and of course mobile and data. This book talks about the convergence 2 years later of those technologies with a new generation of humans, the millennials, much maligned as self-absorbed, and a lot of books and magazine articles and TV commentaries written by old people like me disparage them. I dedicated the book to them. I think they're the best hope for the planet, and I think that they are, above everything else, the first generation in the world to be born comfortable with the technology. Most of us, if we learn a language before we're 14, we can speak it without an accent. If you learn it after roughly the age of 14, you're always going to have an accent. Most of us in the room of a certain age, we're still a little uncomfortable with technology. As much as we use it, as much as we love it, we're still a little uncomfortable. It's a little foreign. It's like when I was a kid, I wondered how the little guys got into my radio. They're so natural with it that when you think of sales and you think of the places and the factors that are involved, if you overlook the phone, you're missing the most important companion. What's really important about the millennials is there's a lot of them. The last watershed generation that impacted the marketplace are boomers, and boomers are getting old, and as nature will have it, we're diminishing in numbers now. In 2015, millennials took over in the global marketplace to be the largest geographic segment because they're having fewer babies than prior generations. They're going to be the dominant segment for another 50 years, according to experts. There are a lot of things about them that are universally true that just can't be denied anymore. One is that branding efforts to get them to want something don't work. What works is friends talking to friends. What works is customers talking to future prospects. And this turns marketing upside down. There is a power shift that's going on, and the shift is not complete, not total, but it's going from the brand marketer to the customer. The customer is now in control for the first time in marketplace history since the good old days of the shop on Main Street. Well, that's a US cliche, but simpler times when the clerk behind the counter knew every customer. And that phone that I mentioned is just always, always on, but you know that part already. As employees, millennials are a different breed. Many people have complained that they hired a batch of millennials and those kids just sit around talking to each other, using their phones, Facebooking all the time. Yeah, that's good stuff, but sometimes gets forgotten. A lot of millennials have this attitude that their elders and their employers sometimes don't like of trust me first. If you want to get my trust, do something to trust me. And when I first heard this, I was clueless. I didn't know what it meant. This guy, Dave Donovan, works for United Software in San Francisco, and he was in a company that hired a batch of millennials because they wanted to get more millennial customers, and they wanted millennial creativity and collaboration, all the good stuff. And what he did was he opened up his Facebook one morning, and there was somebody who reported directly to him, asking him to be his Facebook friend. Seems simple enough, seems easy enough. The problem was that it had never happened in the company, and he said, what the hell, he did it. And lo and behold, other employees started asking their bosses to friend them, and within a year, the company completely changed. It was flatter, better ideas were coming from younger in the organization, meetings were eliminated, they started a private Facebook group, and they exchanged ideas and information all the time, every day over there. Now, if you want to get lethal, let's talk about incumbent companies facing contextual competitors. There are three basic groups of these competitors. The sharing economy is the one that's talked about the most. Like Brian, I'm a little bit cynical about how much sharing is actually going on in the sharing economy, with all deference to the gentleman from Uber, who I don't see anymore. What is different about the sharing economy is it's a software platform, and it's competing with brick and mortar. It's competing with the advantages of an established brand, and the efficiencies of it in marketing and sales and everything is enormous and unstoppable. The customer becomes the channel, which is a part of most millennial marketplace strategies, or should be. And what the experience they have in the store matters more than anything. Millennials in particular, and the rest of us are following and saying, listen to what I say I want and stop telling me what you think I want, and maybe we can do a deal. If you want my data, that's great. What will you give me for my data? A second category that millennials have spawned were started mostly by the guy in the upper left-hand corner. His name is Blake Mykowski. He started Tom's Shoes. How many of you have heard of Tom's? My wife is a zealot for Tom's Shoes. I'm very happy about that. They cost less than the shoes she used to buy. The thing about Tom's is every time you buy a pair of their shoes, they give a pair of shoes to a poor kid who's barefoot somewhere in the world. And when they do that, the customer feels like they've done a social good rather than buy a pair of shoes. When somebody tells my wife nice shoes, she doesn't say, oh yes, it goes nicely with these slacks. She says, you know, Tom's gives to these poor kids, and they talk about poor kids and how good this is. This has become a new business model. The woman in the middle, the girl, she's a teenage girl in the middle, is a customer, is not a customer, is wearing Warby Parker glasses. Warby Parker is a millennial startup that is growing very, very rapidly, selling mostly on websites, although they're now opening up brick and mortar stores. Warby gives a pair of glasses every time that a customer buys one, and they buy them for cheaper than they can in other stores. The third guy is less known. He started a company called Yes To Shampoo. He takes perfectly good vegetables and turns them into health and beauty products. It's got Yes To carrots, Yes To cucumbers, Yes To blueberries, and so on down the line. He's now started 9 companies with the same model. Each one of these companies does something organic in a specific area and then contributes significantly to a cause that's connected with it. And as he said in repeated questioning, my marketing strategy is my customer. What I have to do is keep my customer happy, and they will get me other customers, and it's a lot cheaper than advertising. He's making millions, and he doesn't spend very much in advertising. I can't say zero, but there is some, but it's very minimalist. So what's a big company to do? You're being hit with all these new business models. None of these companies have the luggage, the legacy, and the continuing advantages of brand. There is something to be said about a brand that's been established, been around for years. It does have familiarity, and it still maintains trust, although that's all tapering, and that's been discussed quite a bit today. Now, my advice is, if you can't beat them, join them. And Robert wanted me to name this book Uberize Everything at one point, which I decided not to do. Uber was, at the time, involved in one of its larger controversies, which we won't go into now. But I think what you need to do is Uberize what you can. If you're a big company, find things you can do that join up with cause-based marketing and join up with automating everything you can to make the experience of the customer as seamless, as frictionless as you possibly can. This is an American chain of stores, it's very successful, it's called Nordstrom. They compete with a bunch of other stores which are also developing their own strategies. In this first picture, there's Tom's. It's located exactly in the flagship San Francisco store where 9 West, a very fashionable brand, had been located the year before. They find that they're more popular and they get more sales by putting Tom's in the middle. Speaking in the middle, there's a group, it's a women's collective, it's part of Etsy, it's called Masai Mamas. They're located in sub-Saharan Africa, and they make beaded jewelry and pottery in the tradition of their ancestors. And through Etsy's affiliation with Nordstrom, these goods are now sold on Nordstrom shelves with a little card about what the story is about them. And the competitors are the only people who are not allowed to do the same thing. The guy on the right shows another company that's pretty good at cause-based marketing. Everything he's wearing, from shoes to glasses, comes from waste retrieved from the ocean. Some parts are actually seaweed that's been recycled and turned into thread, but the rest of it is trash pulled out of the ocean. Has anybody heard of a company called Telstra? Yeah. How many of you have gone into their store? Yeah. I usually will eliminate someone who generously sponsored part of my book and invited me to come speak here and is going to give some of you books out in the lobby later. But I couldn't help but make my first tourist attraction the Telstra store. Okay, it was also on my way to the Opera House, but I stopped in there for a visit, and a very nice sales lady who'd never heard of anybody I knew at Telstra, named Sonia, took me around and showed me everything there. She was curious as to what I was doing and why I was asking the questions I was. But from when I entered there and I was asked if there was an appointment, I realized one of the magics of what Telstra is doing is something I haven't seen in any other retail place. They're becoming truly omni-channel. Now, this is a cliche. Those of you that are in retailing or branding understand omni-channel means that your website works with your store, it works with whatever other pieces are involved. It just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't happen that way because there's a bunch of silos. When you go into this store, if you've opted in, they know what you looked at on the website the night before, and they can have those goods ready for you. If you can't decide between products, you put it on the sandbox and you can compare products. If you still can't decide, you can go to another silo, which is your own home, with an old technology NFC card, and look at this data more closely before you make a decision. Then you can buy it online or in the store, wherever you want. I think this will be very imitated. Coming soon, and I've run out of time I've seen, so I'll be very quickly. To the left are a bunch of mannequins in the store window. They don't exist yet, but they will have beacons on them. And in the future, they may be connected to something called LTE Direct, a peer-to-peer technology coming along. But these beacons will take a signal from a phone, through the cloud, of course, and let the store know that you're interested in those goods. And if they happen to know who you are because you are a loyal customer, they will know your size and the colors that you probably prefer. The person in the middle there is using a phone to open up a dressing room door in a retail store. Retailers know this. Browsers are before you go to the dressing room. So when you're browsing, you probably want to be left alone. But as soon as you go into that room and come out wearing something, you want help. And the browser becomes a customer at that point. Finally is one that you probably are familiar with. Are you seeing contactless payment, Apple Pay, that stuff around? Wow. It's coming to Australia very soon. It means the death of the plastic card. It means the death of the long wait with that little gizmo that says processing. It's one more way where everything is being Uberized one piece at a time. When you get out of Uber, one of the pleasures, you don't pay, you just leave, and it gets recorded along with the tip. That's going to be everything you buy. Ultimately, what I'm talking about is pinpoint marketing. Pinpoint marketing is the ability to understand every customer on a global basis, who they are, where they are, and you can predict what they want. This is very powerful, and it doesn't take putting any messages at all in front of them. The one factor that I would go over comes from the CMO of Vision Critical, a company that does business in Australia, it's Chicago-based. And he told me at the end of the day, it isn't about technology, it's about people. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. Thank you very much. Thank you for the extra time.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Shel.